Okay, David, we'll start with you. David Wex from Urban Capital. David, why don't you give us your history or the history of Urban Capital, how you started off in this world?
The world of development, right? Well, I probably am the one who's the oldest here on this, in the hot seats here. I started in the late 90s, before there was really any development happening in the city. I had been practicing law for about a year and then stopped that, and then was looking for some sites really from no base. And for example, would have had no idea if a piece of property in downtown Toronto cost $10,000 or $700,000, nothing. So we first put together a little project called Camden Lofts in the in what really is the fashion district, I suppose you could say, with what ended up being a company related to Dundee Realty. So Camden Lofts, some of you might know, was with Context Project 29 Niagara, the first project down in the Kings Spadina area. And it was, I think, 50-odd units, took 2 years to sell, and finally got going, I think, in '98, was finished in about 2000. And then we took the idea of what we did here in Toronto to other cities, Ottawa and Montreal. So that's really Urban Capital's trajectory at the start.
Thank you so much. So basically, just jump right in and...
I just jumped right. Some people, I didn't come from any family background in this. Some people start by doing townhouses and work their way up. We just, just jumped right in, and luckily the market took off in the late 90s. It was a tough sell. Back then, there was no one living anywhere near where Camden Lofts was now. In fact, it was not. It was an area that was strictly industrial. You weren't allowed to build residential. We got special dispensation from the city at the time. The mayor at the time came to our launch, which doesn't really happen anymore. It was a big part of the big plan to bring residential down to both ends of the city, King Spadina and King Parliament. And we were, as I said, along with Context, really the early ones in that stage.
Perfect. Now, Brian, your company, Lifetime, has been behind some of the biggest launches of even just the past 12 months, but the past few years, Bisha, the Yorkville, Index, Karma, Bond. What would you consider Lifetime's, I guess, claim to fame for all of this success?
Well, claim to fame, it's a little bit hard to define. I mean, for us, there's a huge amount of work that is involved in bringing a site to market, and the amount of work that goes in, the number of consultants that are involved, the number of studies that we have to do, the negotiations with the city. It's a very lengthy and difficult process, but the one thing about Lifetime is that as soon as we find a site, even before we close on a site, we're out in the neighborhood talking to people in the neighborhood, trying to understand it, trying to understand what the vision for that neighborhood is, and quite often that leads to a meeting with the councillor before we even close on the property as well. So we spend a huge amount of time looking at the neighborhood and really trying to understand how the building, or the future building, will play a role in developing the neighborhood. And so we really take nothing for granted. And there's a lot of meetings that we have, even with brokers, with the agents that are going to sell, just trying to get an idea for what needs to be done in order to make the project successful. You mentioned the Yorkville and Bisha, and a lot of those, from where we thought we were going to start to where we ended up, there was a number of changes along the way, and specifically in the case of Bisha, when we acquired that property, we thought we were going to build 18 stories there. And we had a meeting initially with the councillor. He said he'd support 18 stories. 3 months later, after having more meetings and talking to the neighborhood and talking to the city and doing different studies, it became 26 stories. And 3 months later, it became 34 stories. And we ended up with a 41-story building, which we were very happy about. But it was only through that process that we were able to develop a site that would have enough GFA to do what we wanted to do, which was to to have 30,000 square feet of amenity space, to have a hotel component, and then to have the residential units above that with an extra floor of amenity at the very top. So we really tried to create something unique that would give back to the neighborhood that everybody would appreciate, and it sold very well from that.
Out of curiosity, how many people in the room visited the Bisha Presentation Center? Isn't that crazy? In my opinion, one of the most amazing sales offices or presentation centers for any project.
It's kind of a mixed blessing when you have to shut it down and demolish it. You know, you're excited about it starting and about starting construction, but you're depressed about how much time you put into building that one space and the millions of dollars that you put into that space.
But Brian also got a lot of new furniture out of that.
I did actually, but thanks for bringing that up, Shamez.
Now, Shamez, CentreCourt, I guess, would be the youngest of the three companies, but you've been behind three of literally the top launches in the past 12 months with Peter Street, Karma, and Index. What is your definition of a great condo project?
So it has been a remarkable past, I guess, 14 months since we launched Peter Street. Happy to report that we're actually 100% sold now. Those 3 units are gone. I mean, I guess I think it's great that we've had the year that we've had, and sure, many people will say that's a success, but I think what we hold ourselves accountable to will be when we close on all of the units, the success will be defined by if all of the stakeholders involved would say that was a successful project. So starting with the city, are they happy with what we've done on that site that's densified that site, that's brought a good mix of demographic to that neighborhood? I guess I should start with the clients, your clients, our purchasers. Did they feel that that was a worthwhile investment? It's a huge decision, obviously, for each and every one of them. So did they walk away feeling really good? The relationships with brokers such as yourself, Giovanni, did we, as a result of our experience at Peter Street or at Karma or at Index, develop a longer term, more healthy relationship with you, and were you happy and were you treated fairly? All the consultants, as Brian mentioned, I think one thing that a lot of people don't appreciate about the development industry is just they see the developer and they see the name there, and maybe you see the architect and maybe you hear about the interior designer, but there are so many consultants that work on every single project, you know, down to the most things you wouldn't even think about, wind studies and engineers and those sorts of consultants that we work with on a day-to-day basis. Would they walk away saying they were fairly treated, equitably treated, and happy to have worked on that project? So, and then obviously we're not a not-for-profit business, so did we make money? Did we meet our projections, or did we exceed our projections? Did we keep cost under budget? Did we build it in the time frame we anticipated? Did we sell for what we thought the site should sell for? So I think all of those factors combined would be what we would define as success. So on all 3 projects so far, we've been fortunate in achieving sales success, certainly. And now it's the matter of the continuation of that and actually executing on those projects and building on the great year that we've had.
Awesome. And
I just want to say that I think what you just said is bang on, because to be a developer and to successfully develop, there are so many parts. And it is easy to, let's say, make the most amount of money, but your purchasers might not be happy. 20 years later, you might look at your building and not be proud of it. You know, the city could be not impressed with you. You know, you took a long time to pay people, so they're not. On the other hand, you could be the most altruistic person in the world, but you might not have a company a few years later when you haven't made a profit. So I really do think that the toughest thing is to keep it all in check, to make everyone happy at the end of the day. And you're always going to have some people who are a little unhappy about this, that, or other thing. But if by and large everyone is proud and wants to continue to work with you, that to me is the biggest success.
perfect. And David, back to you. You have the unique experience of developing condos not only in Toronto but also Ottawa and Montreal. How do the 3 cities differ? I mean, we're all used to, or at least we are here, used to the Toronto market and how unique it is, but stuff obviously happens outside of the city, so how would you compare the 3?
Well, we are a little unique that way in that we did go and have actually our big growth spurt by going to Ottawa, taking what we learned here in Toronto in the late 90s and early 2000s, and going to a city that had nothing and launching a Toronto-style project there, which is smaller units than what anyone would have thought, urban location, high design, more quality than quantity. and all the local developers, first of all, not being happy about it, an import from Toronto, and then going to Montreal, doing the same thing, Montreal being a huge step because it is a totally different world and rare for Toronto developers to go there. And then actually right now we're launching a project in the fall in Winnipeg, a city that's had no development of the sort we've talked about, and people always say, is there a market there? There is no market there. That's kind of why we're going. We hope to create a market. It's kind of what we did in Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal. Montreal, there was a little bit of a market, but not in our area. So, but the cities are different. Toronto, I think, I'm not saying anything untoward, is largely an investor-driven market. Even if ultimately in our buildings it's mostly owner-occupiers, to get to the huge number of sales we have to rely and work with the investor community. Montreal and Ottawa, not nearly as much. So there you're dealing with end users. The sales process is very different. Nothing like this would ever happen in those cities, and we've tried. So on the one hand, there is something about selling to the end user. It's a difficult process, but it's quite rewarding in its own way. And really in Toronto, the sales process is one where you do have end users, but you also have these avenues. And another small point, very sophisticated market here in all aspects of it, from marketing, design, construction, and less sophisticated in the other cities.
Question for all three of you, but I'll start with Brian. What is your favorite lifetime project and why? And I won't ask you what your favorite lifetime project is.
I love them all. I do love them all. I mean, it's hard to choose, but you know, for each project, you're proud of them in different ways. The Four Seasons were obviously extremely proud because you know, it's a huge project. It's really changing Yorkville and pulling Yorkville, as opposed to it being just 2 blocks. It's now 4 blocks, and it continues at the opposite side of Bay Street. But when you look at the building, you know, the architects did a phenomenal job. So it's also coming close to completion. So, you know, that's when you get really excited about it, because you get to walk through the space and really enjoy it. Bisha is another one of the ones that I'm very excited about, because it's our own hotel brand that we're creating and hoping to take beyond Toronto. So, so those are really my 2 favorites.
Shamez, for you, CentreCourt?
I would say, I mean, we have 3 to pick from, I guess, but for me, for sure, the favorite is Index. I think personally, it was the project that I was involved with from doing the diligence on the site when the opportunity came up to us at the end of last year, through to where it is today. But I guess one thing that I really take pride in on that site was, and I'm not sure if you know, others on this panel had seen that, well, obviously Brian did, but I mean, I think a lot of developers took a look at this site over the years, and it had been one that had been tried to have been launched a couple of times in the past unsuccessfully, most recently in 2000 and 2006, I believe, 2007. But there was a lot of hesitation with the site because it's such a large building. There's roughly 800 units in the project, and it's in an area, for those of you that aren't familiar with the project, the major intersection is Bay and Adelaide, so you're right in the financial district. So not a real residential neighborhood. So when we looked at the site originally, I think there was a lot of questions raised about, is this a site that there's actually going to be, you know, there's not a real neighborhood around here. What's the angle? Who's the end user? And I kind of poked my head up and said, look, I'm on the younger side of the table in this discussion, but I come from a background where I worked, you know, in investment banking. I was working 18 to 20-hour days in the major office buildings on Bay Street, and I know there's a demographic, the professional 25 to 35-year-old demographic who works in the law firms, the accounting firms, the banks, that work right around this site. There's nothing affordable for them to live in close proximity. So sure, it doesn't have a neighborhood feel to it yet, but it may never have a neighborhood feel to it, in fact, but the proximity, the great value of this location, and the fact that people will be able to roll out of bed and be at work in 5 minutes. And I'm not trying to sell you on the project, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, and I am trying to sell you on the project.
Indexcondos.com, index.
But I guess what I love about that project is it took a bit of courage from Lifetime and CentreCourt to say, you know, this is a big project. There's not a real comparable. Trump or Shangri-La would be the closest, but they're not the same market. So we're taking a mega project, a major risk, and we're bringing this to market, and without knowing that there's been a couple projects launched right nearby. And I mean, for urban capital, I think they're a lot more evolutionary. They see things maybe a little bit further ahead and can see the value. But for us, it was a risk. It was something that we had to get comfortable around, and ultimately the market has told us that there is a huge demand to be there, and that's felt good from my perspective.
Okay, and David?
Well, I would say that there's more than one, obviously. They're all like your kids. I have one project which is like a kid that's never left home. It's our Montreal project. It's probably my favorite in the sense of we had some issues with it. They've taken a long time to resolve, and we've been there. And I love that building. It's been really, really tough, but all the people who bought from us, I really do feel committed to them. Also have a condo there, so I can't really go on the elevator if we didn't solve the problem. But so that one was close to me because it was such an incredible challenge. Camden Lofts was the first one, really trailblazer, and that was so that's the first project. And then right now it's in the middle of it. River City, a bit like Camden Lofts, I feel, is going to be very different than all other projects. So we've invested a lot in that project in terms of our time, our working with all the consultants. We have, consultants that have brought a very different perspective. We're bringing them together in Toronto. So that one to me is also like a new kid that we're really, shaping, and so that's probably those three for different reasons.
Perfect. Now, the question that I always have, and I'm assuming people in the audience have it too, and this is for any of you, what are the criteria you have in terms of picking a viable piece of land to build? How do you choose the locations? Because in our world, location is the word that's overused, but you're the ones who are actually providing that location. So what is it that you do, or what is your checklist in terms of picking location?
So I think checklist is the right way to go about it. I mean, I think the basic premise is you have to fall in love with the site. Like, putting numbers and density and profits aside, you have to feel as if this is a remarkable site for some reason, whether it be the future development of the area, its proximity to something natural. In the case of Index, its proximity to being right downtown Bay Street and connected to the path. You have to find something about the site that appeals to you just on an instinctual level. Beyond that, I mean, speaking for CentreCourt, our formula is a formula. We want to be in very dense downtown major locations. You can almost put a box around what downtown Toronto is, in our opinion. And so we want to be right there and close to transit. That's, from a locational aspect, those are key. And then if we find a site or a site's brought to us that has those key attributes, then we go through a detailed and rigorous analysis process, and a lot of it's financial, a lot of it's looking at the numbers of the site. So looking at everything from where we think we could acquire the land for, what we think we could sell the site for, which is oftentimes where we'll go to great agents like Virani and say, here's a site that we're confidentially looking at. What are your thoughts? Where do you think your investors or your clients will find appetite here, and what's the kind of the resistance price point? So we'll look at the sales value of it, and then we'll work with our design consultants and our construction consultants to look at the cost. And it's a simple pro forma where you say, is this deal profitable, and will it be successful from us from that perspective? And if you do are successful in tying up the site and having a period to look at it, you got to do a lot of diligence on the site and just truly make sure you understand what you can develop there, what the constraints are, what the market wants, and then you look at sweet mix and all those more granular type things. So that's how we go about site acquisition.
Any other?
Well, I would say, again, I really quite agree. For me, the first step is totally gut. We don't hire market, or we don't hire people to assess sites for us. It's your total gut instinct. And just following up with what you say, there has to be something that you can hook onto. It's not always the same thing, obviously, but there's got to be something there that you can take and build on. And it could be a really, really bad area, but it has right then and there. We've branded a location in Ottawa that wasn't really great, but it took off because we picked up, it was close to good things, and we picked up on some of those things and ran with them, and it did, I mean, there were people down the street lining up. So you start with that, and I could say this Winnipeg thing, you know, Winnipeg has a reputation for crime. This was a very downtown location with no residential around it. There is no residential around the downtown of that city. And you know, I arrived, I didn't know the city, but at midnight I decided I walked around the location. I walked for 2 hours around it to see whether I would get nervous or anything like that. There's a gut with the area that you've got to figure out first, and if you feel you could run with it, then you go through and you go, okay, you do the checklist of things. But it's got to start with something that you really feel has got legs.
Well, you mentioned for the Ottawa project the word brand or branding. How important is the branding and the story behind the project when it comes to having a successful project launch? And this is for any three of you.
It's actually, I personally think that it's hugely important, because what we need to do is, I mean, obviously we have to find a great location, we have to design a great building, but essentially people that you're selling to, we're selling to you, you're selling to your clients, they're buying into a vision, and we have to explain that vision, and we have to, so we're essentially storytellers. Because those people that are buying from us, they're really not going to be able to really reap the rewards of what they're buying into until 3-4 years down the road. So they have to buy into the vision. Marketing helps us with that. I mean, it's so important to have a great rendering, to have a great story, because you yourselves are going to go out and you're going to talk about the project, and you have so many different projects to talk about, or can talk about, in any particular neighborhood. So it's what makes this site different than all the others. You look at the entertainment district, there's so many different buildings being built right now in the entertainment district, but why would they sell the bond versus any other site? So we have to create a story, we have to obviously design something that's attractive, we have to have great amenities, we have to have a great design, we have from the exterior to the interior, but we also have to give you the tools to work with in order to help you sell. And I think that's
actually
one of the biggest parts.
In our condo report card that I mentioned before, when we evaluate projects for investors, one of the key points is brand and story. Because what we found is that there's tremendous value if, after a project's completed, people continue using the brand name versus the municipal address. Like DNA or Festival Tower, or these are all completed projects, but people, even today, and all of us, use their branded name versus whatever the address is, King Street West or blah, 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 or 80 John type of thing. So that's something we do for our investors, and even when we're picking new ones to choose, we're saying, what is the brand, what is the story behind this, and how will it work? And that's why we love River City, that's why we love Index, because it's not just a name, there's actually a story to tell that can be easily shared from one person to another.
I think it's our principal role as a developer to come up with a compelling message, a unified, compelling message about your development. I think if you just hire people to do it, or you just randomly hire a group of people and you don't bring it together, that's where there might be, at least that's where there's a lack of vision. So although I'm agreeing with everyone, I totally agree that telling a story, getting a compelling message, brand to help everyone understand your product is key. And I know we name a lot of our projects like East Market in Ottawa. It's just east of the market. But people say they live in East Market or River City, South Central. Luckily people don't make the connotation with LA, but these are all things that we've used, McGill West and Montreal, that brand the area, and people still use those names, and you build something around the brand and the name, and that's
absolutely,
that's our role.
Now, a question came up earlier in the morning, and I want to make sure I get it right, but if I don't, feel free to ask me again. We were discussing, and George Karras from RealNet was here talking about statistics and the stats of what's been happening, and unit prices have been stable, but unit sizes get smaller and smaller. And the question was, what about the families that want more space, that can't afford low-rise anymore because it's out of their reach? What's happening in the market, and will there be more product to suit that sort of demand?
Well, so I mean, the trend to smaller units is well documented, and it's a fact. I think we've probably reached a resistance point on that because I don't know how much smaller you can go. But that being said, I want to put something into perspective. If you guys travel to Hong Kong, Beijing, New York, like a 300 square foot studio is not small. I mean, in Hong Kong, that's actually spacious, and in New York, that's kind of standard. So where do you think Toronto's heading directionally? Is it towards that, or is it towards big suburban houses? So, I mean, I do realize it's a trend, and it is something that's allowed us as an industry to keep pricing low. I do think we've reached a resistance point, but I don't think it's necessarily out of line with where the market should be and what the demand is going to be. To answer your question about the larger suite sizes for families, I mean, one thing that's happening at a municipal level is a lot of the downtown projects are being required to provide roughly 10% of the suites as being able to be put into 3 bedrooms. So, you know, if you flip a brochure and you see a 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom option, likely the result of that's a result of the counselor or the planner saying we want a good mix of suites so that we can allow for families to be in here. But truth be told, you know, from our perspective, when we put the 2-bedroom and the 3-bedroom option, very few people are taking the 3-bedroom option. There's not a lot of demand right now for that product, and maybe that's an end user type thing, but I also think previous to Toronto, I was in New York, and in New York it's very common for families to live in apartments. It's not as common here. People are still kind of pushing themselves as far out to the outskirts as they can, but at some point, and I think that point is kind of happening now, it's going to be to the point where I can't commute an hour into my downtown job, so I will move into the downtown condo, and that'll become a norm. Just like 10 years ago, it wasn't, you know, the norm for young professionals to even live right downtown. So I think it's an evolutionary thing, but there are some things at the municipal level that are supporting more larger suites.
The other thing I would add is that's why amenities are far more important today than they used to be. So people see, you know, they have a place where they live, but the building as a whole is their home. And there's more and more congregating outside of their units. And I remember when I first moved into a condo, it wasn't the smallest condo, it wasn't the biggest condo, it was a decent sized condo. But when I went down to the theater room, it was like a 27-inch TV, and I went once and turned it on, and that was the last time I was there. Now, you know, the amenities that we're putting into our sites, it's not just the amenities, but it's also even the retail that we have at the base. So we're very conscious about, you know, how people are going to use the building, what they want in the building, making sure that we're putting in fitness equipment that's not like a hodgepodge of leftover pieces of equipment from different locations, that it's really like, it's a well thought out fitness room that we've hired a consultant for, that we've got a great quality theater room that's just like going to a cinema. And then as an example for Victory Condos, we have 2 restaurants that are going into the base of those, and we spent a huge amount of time meeting different people, making sure that we brought the right operators into those restaurants, and one of them's supposed to open in a couple months. So it'll be very exciting to see how the restaurants and the people living in the units above are all going to intermingle.
Now, David, it's probably been an adventure and a journey for you since Camden. For the benefit of all of us who haven't been in the market for that long, how has the Toronto condo market changed or evolved since Camden?
You know, it just doesn't seem that long ago that I was not the oldest guy in these things. Well, it's like, obviously it's changed hugely. I don't think there's many places in the world that have had what we've had. It's really unique. World over, and it's still moving. So we've been lucky, and there's a whole, I really think at one time I could write a book about this, but there are a lot of reasons why I think Toronto or Ontario, but specifically Toronto, has had this condo boom related to the fact that we have a Tarion system here. Developers can use deposits. Deposits are secured, so people are comfortable with that. That's pretty unique. We have a huge immigration there is huge immigration to the city from groups that traditionally purchase real estate. Look at Montreal. The immigration there is from countries where there isn't that culture. And in our Montreal project, 15% of our purchasers are francophone. I mean, in the city, the Montreal condo market's the size of Ottawa because the vast majority of that city are not condo purchasers. So we've had that here. We've had strong economy. We have had the check of the financial system that hasn't allowed us lemmings to go crazy and just build over. And all those things have resulted in this kind of synergy that has resulted in what you see happening there today. So the big difference, obviously, is just the number of condominium developments. Also, the governments, which I totally support, green belt around the city, has brought a lot of developers who were in the low-rise downtown. All of that has resulted in a really robust market, way more than what you would otherwise have if all these things weren't coming together. And the fact that we have a sophisticated market means that we've been able to keep it together. So it's pretty unique, I would say.
I just want to add one thing to that. If I go back even 5 years ago when we launched Victory, we sold a percentage, probably about 30 to 40% through the brokers. And then we would open up the sales office, and it took us 1.5 years to sell to the 70% mark before we started talking to the banks. So, you know, even in a short span of time, within a few years, I don't think that we could open up a sales office today and open the door and expect end users to come in. It doesn't work like that anymore. And so we're very dependent now on great brokers and great agents, because you're the link that we need with end users and investors. And there used to be a time when end users would walk through our door, and really, I'm not saying that we don't sell any of our product that way, but it's the percentage that we sell today versus the percentage that we used to sell even 5 years ago has dramatically changed.
And I think just to say that it's not that you can say, oh, it's a brokered sale, so it's an investor. That idea is also out the door. People, end users, have realized that if they want to get into a project early, they need a broker. I don't know how you guys have done this, but you've made everyone feel like they need to use a broker, and we've been part of that by giving early entry to the broker community. So now, really, that's been a big change in the sales. And whereas once upon a time, you might say, if you took your marketing, your advertising / marketing budget and your commission budget and put it together, maybe it was 60-40 in terms of you spend 60% on advertising and just that promotion, and 40% on commissions. Now it's totally reversed, where you're really spending the money on commissions and ways of attracting the broker community, even though at the end of the day you might just be reaching end users. That's been a big change I think we've seen in this city.
Okay, now for any of you, what do you foresee as upcoming trends to watch in terms of the future of the condo market, whether it's materials or design or locations or any type of features of a condo project? What do you foresee as the next big thing?
I would say the biggest change that I've seen in the last little while is that we're not just building residential buildings anymore. They're mixed-use developments. They're an upward community. Quite often now, when we find a site, we'll look at it and say, can I put residential units? Can I put commercial parking? Can I put retail? What kind of retail? Even office components to some degree. So it really becomes a unique community. You're putting a lot of people into one spot, and so you're trying to create something that will give back to the community in so many different ways. And part of that is understanding where you're building. Part of it is meeting with the community, and you know, the process, the rezoning process. If I find a site that's not zoned and I go through the rezoning process, it's 1.5 years roughly. A lot changes in 1.5 years. Neighborhoods change in 1.5 years. But there's a number of meetings that we go through with the councillor, with the community, in order to build the right building for that area.
One thing, just we have partners from other countries, and one thing that they actually note coming here is how fast our rezoning process is, because we have Israeli and Irish partners, and both those countries you could be talking about 7 to 10 years to get a site rezoned. So I don't really know how, that's why they're here probably. As for the future trends, I think we're all searching as to what that is, because we've had this amazing process over the last 5 to 10 years of recreating the city of Toronto as a vertical city, a glassy vertical city, and this has been this amazing thing. The city is so different, and in 3 or 4 years, based on everything that works right now, will be so different. So we've done that, and we'll continue to do that, but that's been the big step. But what are we going to do next? And I don't have a crystal ball, but maybe other parts of the city. Maybe we'll start to recreate the inner suburbs of our city, because those are big areas of the city, huge areas by surface area, that really do need that to be reimagined and that's where I think families might start living also. You might be able to build larger units there in dense townhouses, mid-rise buildings along some of the parts of our city, the main streets of our city. That could be something. There's a lot of things outside the box that we're working on right now that could start to happen. Because I think, by the way, in terms of design, we have a lot of high design stuff going on here. And while there will be new iterations, the concept of the high design is already here.
One other trend, and I agree with everything that was said, one other trend that I think is worth noting, and what the implications of it for you are, I'm not 100% sure, but is the rise of these mega developments. So I talked about Index, which was 800 units. I was just doing some analysis the other day to look at mega projects, which I think I cut off at 600 units or more, which, if you think about that, in a few years ago, that would be 2 major launches. I think there's 6 or 7, you probably know the number, 6 or 7 coming out this year alone. So because of the smaller suite sizes, because of, I guess, a more dense, friendly municipal planning environment, you're seeing these projects that are major projects, and they'll be selling for a while. Even if they have a great, successful launch, they still will be selling for a while. So one of the things, and maybe I'm going a bit off the beaten path here, that I wanted to mention that I think you guys do very well, Giovanni, and I would, I see a lot of other agents that don't do that so well, is to actually focus on projects. So pick your winners, pick projects you believe in, and if there are these mega projects, I mean, you could literally be focusing on selling in these projects for a year, at least, if not longer, in a slower market environment. So I think the trend of mega projects, you should be aware of it and realize that not every project is the standard 300 or 200 units or whatever the average has been over the past 10 years, but you're starting to see a lot of projects that, and it's not a brand new thing, but I think there's the number of them relative to the entire launch is a trend that's worth noting.
Okay. On behalf of everyone here, gentlemen, thank you so much for spending the time with us.